Hi, my name is Star Kulu. I'm also known as the girl in the middle, and today I'm joining you with a very important video. I'm in partnership today with Siyakunakekela, a foundation that is focused on the alleviation and the addressing of the overall issue that is gender-based violence in South Africa. And today I've been asked to kind of have a conversation about the awareness of it, but from my perspective. When I think about gender-based violence, the first thing that I think about is our interactions on social media and how amplified social media has made the missing of children, the missing of women, the outing of abusers. Social media sort of amplified it. I don't necessarily think that there's been a rise, more so that because we're on social media, we see it a lot. And because we see it a lot, and because we're having the emotional conversations already in our engagement with our peers online, I thought to myself, what is missing from the gender-based violence conversation right now? What is missing for me as the girl in the middle when I think about what stresses me about gender-based violence in South Africa, how it could affect me as a woman in South Africa? My mind kind of goes to, okay, we're having the online conversation, we're addressing things from a pace of peers, but what is happening in terms of legislation? What is changing in terms of education? And how are those things meeting the current conversation that has been amplified by social media? And so I feel like my stance today in this video really is around just having a look at the legislative changes that need to happen and the small changes that can be implemented within the educational system that could help this conversation move forward in a more useful way, in a way that continues to update information, in a way that continues to equip people who already know about GBV, but also reintroduce it to people who know nothing or people who need to know nuances about it. I think that is where the gap is in South Africa right now. Am I gonna fix it in a 10-minute video? Absolutely not. But what I really think is important is to continue to do an awareness drive around this so that people, victims, are able to watch a video and recognize themselves, watch a video and recognize that they're victims, anything. But I think the worst thing would be to keep quiet about something like this. So today's conversation is about gender-based violence, taking it from the place of legislature as well as education and what that currently looks like in South Africa. So thanks for joining me, guys. So why are we in this mess? We're in this mess in South Africa because we have a failed system. We have a women's league, we have the ANC, but we don't really know what they're doing. We're paying taxes, but we don't really know where that money is going. I think what we need to be doing with the gender-based violence issue in South Africa is addressing it the same way that we address HIV/AIDS. If you guys remember, when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I remember pamphlets and they had Ask Connie Ferguson in them, and she was dating or married to some white guy called Ian, and they were telling such a beautiful story from a Soul City perspective. And the story that they were telling was really about how you get AIDS, how you get TB, how to address TB, what the effects of the pneumonia is when it starts to kick in. All of those pamphlets, the drives, the campaigns, the community service that they did, all of that together collectively is, for me, I feel, what we should be doing with gender-based violence. How do we not have a campaign that is going to run for the next 5 to 10 years, dismantling the nuances of gender-based violence, undoing the foundation of where it comes from, and addressing things at the core like we did with HIV/AIDS? Even with HIV/AIDS, it's a really great example because we're 20-something years into having an open conversation about it, but it is still a taboo. From my perspective, I've also done the research. We have no view of what the plan is around GBV for the next few years. We have no kind of update and no confirmation of developing laws, nothing about implementing training. And if the conversation is being had within communities, it's not being had at scale, and it should be, considering the numbers that we have here. So I think the interventions right now, I don't want to take it from a place where I'm saying nothing is happening or no one's doing anything, because that's not something I know. But I will say that if I'm sitting as a citizen of South Africa and I cannot go and I don't know where to go to find the information directly, or where to reach where the Women's League has shared that this and this is what they plan to do, then there's no information, because information in its core is at its best when it is accessible. So if there is information about this and it's not accessible, it is useless information as we stand. And so for me, I think looking at the interventions that I was thinking about from a legislative perspective is I want to start by premising this and saying that in South Africa, we've got amazing laws, amazing liberation laws that have been put in place. Where I think we falter is in actually having them function. So yes, they exist, right? But are people getting the full breadth of what they deserve when they do approach the police, when they do put their issues forward? No, they are not. So that is in essence a failed system, because if legislation is good, if the implementation of it is bad, then it's useless. Then all it is at this stage is a textbook. So I think that we need to take what we currently have done right and expand on it and continue to expand on it. And I think that that is the role of the politicians, that is the role of lawyers, that is the role of people that have legislative power in South Africa. I think we need to start building capacity building workshops and training things within the communities that are affected. Instead of sitting once a year and saying, this is what we plan to do, these are our facts, oh my gosh, what's happening in South Africa? We need to start looking and saying, cool, if Eastern Cape is showing us that they've got the highest numbers in terms of GBV right now, that's probably where you need to start, right? Then you need to do research within the areas to figure out what the nuances are, what the actual, where people are feeling their abuse is coming from, and kind of getting a checklist of, okay, this is the type of abuse that kind of exists in Eastern Cape, or these are the frequent stories that we're getting in terms of police, community leaders, etc., etc. And then use that information from the research to build the programs that will answer to them. Because at this point, I feel like if we're having an overall conversation once a year and we're not addressing communities, we're just letting boys turn into men with no boundaries. We definitely need to develop some kind of data collection or analysis system. This is a system that needs to kind of collect the data around GBV around South Africa, and then use that, like I said, for the Eastern Cape example, use that to create the programs, use that to create the educational life orientation books, the textbooks, etc. Because right now we're taking it from a place of, this is a woman's anatomy, this is a man's anatomy, this is what happens when this happens. No one is talking about, the after effects of sex, the after effects of relationships, negative relationships. No one is addressing that. And if we're not addressing the nuance, we're not addressing anything. Legislature has power in this because obviously that's where our taxes are going. We're hoping that with our taxes, they're able to put together these programs, make the textbooks that are going to make sense to where our current generation X is sitting and not where we were 20 years ago. I think the other thing is, in terms of legislature and maybe prison systems in general, is that you need to raise the cost to men by making sure that there are systems in place that punish people or treat people. So it's either prison or it's a treatment program or it's a combination of both. I can't sit here and say I know what the answer to that is, but I do think that there is something missing when it comes to raising the cost to men. I remember a few months ago, I can't remember what it was, who it was specifically, but it was actually a government leader who was charged with rape and was put on, I think was given 250 Rand bail. And if you're going to put 250 Rand against such a violent act, that is sending a message. That is sending a message to lawyers. That is sending a message to other judges about, how we kind of base this thing in South Africa. It's also sending a message to perpetrators that this thing is not taken seriously. I could get out a 250 Rand bond. And a lot of the times people leave prison and use the bail time to seek revenge. So it's really a system that has not taken the nuances of abuse, that has not taken into consideration the fact that if I am the abused sitting at home, I'm not sitting at home happy because the person is in jail. I am still scared. I am still fearful. I still am waiting for that person to get bail or come out at some point and do whatever. If a person is an abuser, you cannot tell where their cap is. Just because you've raped me doesn't mean you're a murderer. Just because, you know what I mean? Like the sphere of abuse is violence, and everything under that umbrella is violence. So you cannot risk it when it comes to victims by giving people 250 Rand bail and allowing people with resources, power, who know where you live, to be free after they have violated you. So I think that legislatively, that needs to be stricter. And then around education, which is something I've always been very, very drawn to, especially being in the high school that I was in. I'll never forget the life orientation book. In the middle, it was stapled together and a few of the pages were stapled together. And obviously, as curious kids, like, don't staple something, honey, we'll unstaple it and restaple it. Like, we want to see what you don't want us to see. And when you open those few pages that they'd stapled together in the life orientation textbook, it was the pages that showed the anatomy of a woman and the anatomy of a man and the actual process of sex, which I thought was so unfortunate. Of course, giggle worthy at that time. Yes, we're young. But now I guess I find it even sadder that we weren't afforded that conversation so that we can dismantle the giggle effect around talking about a penis and talking around a scrotum, talking about a vagina, because that in itself creates the foundation for fear, right? Because there is this halo effect around the conversation around sex. So now you feel like, oh my gosh, this is something that has an element of secrecy, which means if I have abuse or anything like that around sex, it should have an element of secrecy, which in turn also affects young kids who are introduced to pedophiles, because pedophiles will bank on the fact that this thing should be a secret, and that will be the only thing that will allow them to continue to violate a child, is the fact that they banked on the fact that children know about secrets and they know when something is bad, and to combine those two things will put the predator in power. And I feel like that education exists nowhere. It's something that we know as friends, it's something that we know within our circles, but where is the information being infiltrated from an education perspective? We need to start promoting, or more vigorously promoting, non-violence directly to boys, which takes me back to life orientation. This is not something that when a boy is 18, he just decides, oh, will I be an abuser or not? There is stuff that happens as they grow from the age of comprehension, which is like 2, 3, 4, right through into their adulthood, that creates the human being, that creates the base of an abuser, that creates the foundation of an abuser. A lot of the time, it's abuse that they themselves went through. But what I love about school is that it almost creates an opportunity to intervene. And what I love about teachers is that they are almost a neutral intervention, in the sense that, yes, they might be mothers and they have the idea that you want your kids to be okay, but they're also coming from an educative perspective, right? They're coming from an educational perspective, but also where they meet you in the middle is that they can be neutral. So if you're coming to a teacher as a student and you're saying, I had sex and I regret it, you're not going to get the reaction that you get from your parent. You're going to get the reaction of a teacher. And often what I hope is that the reaction of a teacher will also be met with solutions, will also be met with, it's okay, take a breath, will also be met with a level of understanding. And I feel like in schools, in the educational systems, from primary school, life orientation needs to speak to the climate of the current atmosphere that the generation is living in. Our generation at this time was dealing with high school pregnancies, HIV, things like that. That's not to say that GBV wasn't rife, but this generation specifically is dealing with missing girls, girls that are raped, etc., etc. It's a little bit more blatant. And so why wouldn't their life orientation textbooks speak to that? And from a perspective of, we need to give out textbooks every year. We have life orientation across schools in South Africa. All it would take is to change the subject matter of the life orientation classes to begin a conversation about the real issues around sex education in South Africa. I hope that you found value in today's conversation. I don't expect to move the dial in 20 minutes, but I do hope that someone is able to recognize themselves in this, or recognize their inner potential to affect change.